In the fall of 1887, two brothers walked out of a hollow in the Missouri Ozarks that they had walked into 6 days earlier. They looked the same clothes, same faces, the same shy way of standing half a step behind their mother. But the boys who came back were not the boys who left. Within a week, the younger one was reciting the names of towns that would not exist for another 40 years. The older one had started drawing a machine that nobody in that valley had the words to describe. Their teacher wrote it all down in a leather notebook. And then, sometime in the spring of 1888, that notebook, the boys' names, and the page they were entered on in the county school register all vanished from the record at the exact same time. This is the case of the Hollis brothers, and the reason you have never heard of it is the whole point. Let me take you back to how it started. Elias Hollis was 11. His brother Thomas was 9. They lived with their mother in a cabin below Bald Knob in what was then Taney County, a stretch of ridges and sinkholes and limestone hollows where the ground had a habit of opening up under your feet without warning. Their father had died 2 winters before. The family was poor even by the standards of that place, which is to say they were poor in a way most people today would not survive. You have to understand what that country was in 1887. The Ozarks were not the tame vacation land they are now. They were old, worn-down mountains full of caves and sinkholes and underground rivers that ran for miles in the dark. People built their lives on top of a landscape that was mostly hollow underneath, and they knew it, and it made them careful. The hollows had names, most of them, borrowed from people who had been pushed off that land a lifetime earlier. But a few had no names at all, because up on those ridges there were places nobody wanted to claim. On the morning of October the 9th, the 2 boys were sent up the ridge to bring back a strayed milk cow. That was the ordinary thing. It was the kind of errand they had run 100 times. They took a lantern because the light came late into the deep hollows, and they took a length of rope because the cow had wandered before. Their mother watched them go up the tree line and turn east along the ridge. She said later that Elias stopped at the top and looked back at her, which he never did, and lifted his hand once, and then the 2 of them went over the rise and out of sight. Then she went back inside and started the day's work, and did not think about them again until the light started to fail. They did not come back that night. The neighbors turned out the next morning. This was a community of maybe 40 families spread across the hollows, and when a child went missing everyone came. Men with dogs, men with lanterns, boys not much older than the ones they were looking for. They walked the ridge in a line, calling the 2 names into the trees until their voices... I have to pause here for a second, because what I just described, that is one case from a much larger pattern. There are 35 documented cases in a document I put together. Different cities, different decades, different types of evidence. Every single one follows the same sequence: discovered, documented, acquired, disappeared. I could not fit all of it into a video. It's in the pinned comment below. Find it before we continue. One of them, an old man named Josiah Pauls, who had been born in that county before it was a county, refused to go in at all, and he was not a man who was known to be afraid of anything. When you read the few accounts that survive, the same phrase keeps appearing. The men said the hollow was, in their words, one of the old places, and they said the old places kept things. When the younger men pressed him, Paul said only that his grandfather had warned him off that ground, and that a wise man left such places the way he found them. And before we go further, I need to pause for a second, because what I'm about to tell you gets significantly darker, and I realized a while ago that some of this cannot be fully explained in a video format. The complete reconstruction of what the 2 Hollis boys came back knowing, the phrases they repeated for 6 nights straight, the symbol Elias carved into the barn door, the exact page, the county recorder tore out of the 1887 school register, and the note he left in its place. I put it all into a written document. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now let's continue. For 6 days, the search parties worked that ridge. They found nothing at all, no footprints going in, no lantern, no rope, and here is the first detail that does not fit. The hollow the cow was standing beside was not deep. It was a shallow limestone cut, maybe 30 feet across, that ended in a rock face. There was nowhere for 2 boys to go. Men who had hunted that ground their whole lives said you could stand at the entrance and see the back wall. There was no cave. There was no shaft. There was nothing to get lost in. And yet on the 7th morning, both boys walked out of that same hollow, in daylight, in full view of 2 search party members who later signed statements about what they saw. The boys were clean. Their clothes were not torn or dirty the way you would expect after 6 nights in the open in October. They were not hungry. They were not cold. Their shoes, which had been worn nearly through before they left, were noted by more than one person to look almost new, the leather soft and unmarked, as though they had walked on nothing rough at all. They did not seem to understand that 6 days had passed. Thomas, the younger one, asked his mother why she was crying, and said they had only been gone for a little while. He said they had been somewhere warm. He said a man had shown them things. The mother did the thing any mother would do. She held them and fed them and put them to bed and told herself it was over. Before I go further, that document in the pinned comment. If you have not found it yet, go there now, because everything I cover in these videos is one piece of a pattern that only becomes visible when you see all 35 cases together. The document shows you the full pattern. What I can show you here is the surface. What is down there is everything underneath it. Pinned comment, now, then come back. The man is still talking, even here. Nobody in that family slept well after that. And within the week, the sleeping itself became the problem. I want to walk you through the 6 days the way the community tried to, because they did try. They went back to that hollow with the 2 boys and asked them to show where they had been. Both boys walked to the same spot, the rock face at the back, the solid wall of limestone that had no opening in it, and both of them put their hands flat against the stone, as though there were a door there that only they could see. Thomas said it was warm. Josiah Pauls, the old man, was there that day, and he was the one who wrote the only account of it that survives in his own hand, in a letter to his brother in Tennessee. He wrote that the 2 boys stood with their palms on that dry stone wall for the better part of an hour, and that when they finally took their hands away, the rock where their palms had been was wet. Not damp. Wet, he wrote, like the inside of a mouth. Now, a child going missing and coming back with a strange story is not, by itself, a mystery. Children get lost. Memory does odd things under stress. If that were the whole of it, this would be a sad footnote and nothing more. But that is not the whole of it, because of what happened over the following weeks. The teacher was a woman named Ada Renwick. She had come out from Springfield to run the one-room school, and she was, by every account, a serious and educated person, not the sort to invent things. She kept a notebook. And when the Hollis boys came back to her classroom, she started writing down what they said, because it frightened her, and because she did not know what else to do with it. The first thing was the language. Thomas, the 9-year-old, had begun speaking in his sleep. His mother described it as a low, steady speech, unbroken, going on for an hour or more. It was not gibberish. It had structure. It repeated. Renwick, who read Latin and some Greek, wrote in her notebook that it was none of those, and that it was not any tongue she had ever heard a living person speak. She wrote out 11 phrases she caught cleanly. She noted that Elias, the older brother, would answer his sleeping brother in the same language, without waking. That detail is the one that stops me every time. 2 children, asleep, in separate accounts, on separate nights, holding a conversation in a language neither of them had ever been taught, that an educated woman could not place against any living speech. You can explain one boy babbling. A shared, structured, back-and-forth exchange between 2 of them is a different kind of thing entirely. Renwick tried, in her careful way, to write the sounds down as best she could render them into letters. She noted that certain words came up again and again, as if they were names, or numbers, or the kind of word you repeat because it matters. And she noted, in an entry she underlined twice, that when she read one of those phrases back to Thomas in the daylight, the boy went white, and asked her, very quietly, not to say it again, because it was, in his words, one of the things you are not supposed to say out loud where the ground can hear you. She stopped reading them aloud after that. But she kept writing them down, because she had the sense, she wrote, that if she did not record them, they would be taken, the same way everything else about those boys would eventually be taken. And in the end, she was right. Before we move on to what happened on the 7th night, Stop for a second. What you just heard about the words the younger boy spoke in his sleep is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the teacher's original notebook. The 11 phrases, the dates they named. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The second thing was worse, because it could be checked. Elias started talking about places, not places he could have known. He described a city he called the Drowned Grid, laid out in perfect squares, with buildings taller than any church, and streets under water that people still walked. He named towns. Renwick wrote them in her notebook because they meant nothing to her. Some of those names, we now know, belonged to towns that were not founded until the 1920s and 1930s, lake towns. Places that only came to exist after the rivers of that region were dammed and whole valleys were flooded. He was describing, in 1887, a landscape that would not be built for 2 generations. And then there was the drawing. Elias drew the same object over and over, on slate, on the barn door, in the dirt with a stick. Renwick copied one version into her notebook and tried to describe it in words, because she did not have the vocabulary for the shape. She wrote that it was a structure of concentric rings, 8-sided, with lines of force, her phrase running between the points like the spokes of a wheel that was also somehow a wall. Anyone who has looked at the Star Fort question, the strange 8-pointed fortress geometry that shows up on old maps across the entire world, on every continent, in places that supposedly had no contact with each other, will feel the floor tilt a little when they read that description. A child in a dirt-poor hollow in 1887 was drawing the exact geometry that people argue about online today. He said the man in the warm place had shown it to him. He said it was for holding something in, or keeping something out. He was never sure which, and it seemed to trouble him. Renwick pressed him on the drawing more than once, because it unsettled her more than the language did. Words can be faked. A child can hear a strange sound and repeat it. But a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, working separately, on slate and on wood and in the dirt, kept producing the same precise 8-sided figure with the same internal lines every single time, down to the number of points and the way the rings nested inside each other. That is not the sort of thing you invent by accident and then reproduce exactly on demand. That is the sort of thing you have seen. Renwick wrote that Elias could not tell her what it was made of, only that it did not, in his words, stay still if you looked at it too long. She asked him how big it was. He thought about it and said, bigger than a mountain, and then he said, but it was also small enough to hold, and both of those are true, and that is the part nobody believes. Then he stopped talking about it and would not draw it again for a week. Sit with that pattern for a second. A drowned city in a perfect grid, an 8-pointed fortress that holds something in or keeps something out, a landscape that would be flooded 2 generations later, a family that would shortly be erased. Every one of those is a load-bearing piece of the buried history question, and here they all are, coming out of 2 children who could not have assembled them from anything in their world. Now, this is where a normal story would build toward a happy ending or a tragic one, and either way it would end. This one does something stranger. It ends by being erased. Word got around, the way it does in a small community. A boy speaking in tongues, a boy drawing devil marks on the barn. In 1888 Missouri, that was dangerous talk, and Ada Renwick knew it. She wrote in her notebook that she feared for the family, and that she had gone to the county seat to ask, quietly, whether there was any record of that hollow, any old survey, anything at all. She wanted to understand what she was dealing with. That is the last full entry in the notebook that anyone ever read. Here is what we can piece together about what happened next, from the fragments that survived in other people's letters. Ada Renwick went to the county recorder's office in the spring of 1888. She asked to see the old plat maps and the school register. A few weeks after that visit, 3 things happened close together. The Hollis family left the county. Nobody recorded where they went. The school register for that year had a page removed, cleanly cut, not torn, and in its place someone had written a single line that later readers described as a warning, though no copy of the exact words survives in any archive I have been able to find. And Ada Renwick's notebook was gone. She herself lived another 30 years, But she never spoke of the boys again, except once, near the end of her life, to a niece, who wrote it down in a letter that is the reason we know any of this at all. According to that letter, Renwick said only that the recorder had told her something when she went asking. He told her the hollow was on a list, an old list, a list of places that were not to be surveyed, not to be entered, not to be recorded. She asked him who kept the list, and the letter says he did not answer the question. He simply took her name down instead. Think about what that means for a second. A rural county recorder in 1888, in the middle of nowhere, was working from an instruction that certain places were to be kept off the official record on purpose. Not forgotten, not overlooked, deliberately left blank. That is the thread that runs through every case like this one, and it is the reason the Tartaria question refuses to die no matter how many times people are told to stop asking it. The pattern is not that history was lost. The pattern is that someone, at the level of the record itself, decided what would be allowed to exist on paper and what would not. So, what actually happened to Elias and Thomas Hollis in that hollow? I want to be careful here, because this is where it would be easy to hand you a neat answer, and the honest thing is that there is no neat answer. But there are a few shapes the story could take, and each of them is worse than the last. The first shape is the simple one. Two boys got lost, got scared, invented a story, and a superstitious community turned it into something it was not. The problem with the simple shape is the checkable part, the town names. Elias named settlements that did not exist yet, and would only come to exist after the land was flooded. There was no way for a 9-year-old in 1887 to know it. The second shape is the one the old men in the search party believed, that the hollow was a door, that the old places, as they called them, are thin spots, where the ground between one time and another does not hold, and that the boys fell through and were put back 6 days later carrying knowledge that did not belong to them yet. In this version, the man in the warm place is not a man at all, and the things he showed them are not visions of the future. They are memories of something that was already there, before, and was taken down, and drowned, and struck from the record, exactly the way the boys themselves would be struck from the register a few months later. And that is the shape that should bother you, because the same hand that erased a city erased 2 children who remembered it. The scale is different, the method is identical. You find the thing that knows too much, and you take it off the page. The third shape is the one I keep coming back to, and it is the one I cannot shake. What if the boys were not shown the future or the past at all? What if they were shown the same thing we are all standing inside of right now, and simply lacked the words for it, so they described it as a warm place and a man and a wall of light? What if the drowned grid is not a prophecy and not a memory, but a description of the machinery that keeps the record clean? And what if the reason the list exists, the list of places that must never be surveyed, is that every one of those places is a spot where someone might walk in and see how the whole thing is actually built? We do not get to know. The notebook is gone, the register page is gone, the family is gone. All we have left is a niece's letter and a handful of signed statements from men who watched 2 clean, calm, well-fed children walk out of a shallow hollow that had no back to it 7 days after they walked in. The Hollis brothers were real. You can find the shape of them in the census gaps, in the missing register page, in the correspondence that mentions them sideways and then never again. Everything that would let you know them fully was removed, and it was removed at the same moment by people who never explain themselves, working from a list that no one will admit still exists. That is the case, and the last thing I will leave you with is the thing that keeps me up. Ada Renwick asked the recorder who kept the list. He never answered. He took her name down instead, which tells you the list was still being added to. In 1888, and there is no reason at all to think anyone ever stopped. If this is the kind of history you were never supposed to find, the buried version, the one under the version they let you keep, then subscribe, because next time I am opening the file on a set of foundations found 40 feet under a modern American city, laid out in the same 8-pointed geometry Elias Hollis drew on his barn door by people who were told, officially, that the ground under their feet was empty. The link to the full Hollis document is in the description. I'll see you in the next one.